Justice for interracial couples in court. McLaughlin v. Florida and Loving v. Virginia.
Also, I feel like some of the time it's not so much that the problem they have is with you being biracial. It's just kind of living your life as a biracial child because they're not sure what to refer to some things like or what it's like. So if
That's Laith Rahman, whose mother is white and his father is Pakistani. In the 1960s, his parents' marriage would have been illegal and both would have been prosecuted. Thesis: interracial marriage has had a long and difficult journey, as it was illegal for most of American history. The cases Loving v. Virginia and McLaughlin v. Florida legalized interracial relationships and marriages, and since then it has been on a rise. However, many people see it as immoral, and more justice has to be given to interracial couples. Before 1967, interracial marriages throughout the United States was not only illegal, it was seen as a disgrace and a taboo. Let's go back to 1664 when the United Kingdom controlled the Atlantic seaboard. In that year, Maryland passed the first law that banned marriage between whites and black slaves. It even said that white women who married black men would be slaves under the man's master. These laws that prohibited interracial marriage are known as anti-miscegenation laws. Virginia followed suit in 1691 when they banned any interracial marriage, and if such occurred, they would be exiled. Maryland then adopted this policy, as they supported Virginia's law. In 1725, Pennsylvania banned interracial marriage, but in 1780 became the first state to legalize interracial marriage, as they were banning slavery. Though it was a small step, this move proved enormous for interracial couples and abolitionists. In 1843, Massachusetts became the second state to legalize interracial marriage, as they were healing from slavery. By now you can see a pattern. The southern states prohibited interracial marriage, while the northern states slowly legalized it. While the U.S. Civil War abolished slavery, it did very little to provide federal justice for interracial marriage. Interracial marriage still continued to have a negative stigma. In fact, in 1871, Representative Andrew King of Missouri proposed a constitutional amendment to ban interracial marriage. Though it got defeated, it would get proposed again in 1912 and 1928. In 1884, the Supreme Court ruled on the issue in Pace versus Alabama. This saw Tony Pace, a black man, and Mary Cox, a white woman, criminalized for violating Alabama state law. The Supreme Court had to decide if interracial marriage had to be prosecuted. The Supreme Court unanimously supported Alabama and used the 14th Amendment in their argument, as both Pace and Cox were arrested despite their race. This case proved to be the law for 81 years. In 1922, Asians were targeted in the Cable Act, which prevented interracial marriage with them. This law was supported by the United States in United States versus Bhagat Singh Thind, which ruled that Asian Americans couldn't be citizens. The Cable Act would be overturned by the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. Despite this long and unjust history for interracial couples, favorable events would hit them in 1964 and 1967. The 1964 case McLaughlin v. State of Florida saw Florida Statute 798.05 overturned, which criminalized interracial relationships. However, the case legalized interracial relationships and not marriage. That would be decided by the landmark case of Loving v. Virginia. To learn more about the case and its legacy, we must go back to 1958. That June, two Virginians, Mildred Jeter, a black woman, married Richard Loving, a white man. They were married in Washington, D.C., and came back to Virginia for their new home. However, in just 5 weeks, the Lovings were arrested for violating the Virginia Racial Integrity Act, an anti-miscegenation law. They were sentenced to 1 year in prison. This sentence was stopped on the condition that they leave Virginia for 25 years. Eventually, the Lovings moved to Washington, D.C., where they faced financial hardship. Later, they came to Virginia to visit Mildred's parents, but got arrested. While in jail, the Lovings wrote to the United States Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy for help. He brought in the American Civil Liberties Union to defend the couple. The Virginia Supreme Court supported the law, so it got appealed all the way to the Supreme Court. The trial started in April 1967, and there were tense exchanges. The ACLU lawyer Philip Hirschkopf famously said, "These are not health and welfare laws. These are slavery laws, pure and simple." Finally, on June 12, 1967, the Supreme Court unanimously favored the Lovings and overturned Pace versus Alabama. They overturned all state laws that prohibited interracial marriage and used the 14th Amendment to strike down anti-miscegenation laws. Chief Justice Earl Warren said in his decision for the case, under our Constitution, the freedom to marry or not marry a person of another race resides with the individual and cannot be infringed by the state. Eventually, all states legalized interracial marriage. Interracial marriage was finally legalized in Alabama after a November 7, 2000 referendum. Alabama was the last state to legalize it, with 59% of the voters removing Section 102 of the state law, which prohibited interracial marriage. Since then, interracial marriage has been rising. In 1967, 3% of couples were interracial, whereas today it's around 17%. Many famous couples are interracial, such as New York Mayor Bill de Blasio and his wife Shirley MacLaine, President Barack Obama's parents, and comedian Trevor Noah's parents. McLaughlin versus Florida and Loving versus Virginia provide justice for interracial couples during the time of the Civil Rights Movement. In fact, Justice Anthony Kennedy used Loving versus Virginia to support his opinion on Auber Jeffel versus Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage. Throughout American history, interracial couples have been stripped of their basic civil rights because of who they married. The Supreme Court played a crucial role. Initially, they supported states that banned interracial marriage, but the civil rights movement led them to give rights to these couples. The cases McLaughlin versus Florida and Loving versus Virginia broke the barrier of the illegalization of interracial marriage. These two cases were a big deal for the civil rights movement that happened at the same time. After all, interracial couples are like any other couple and their skin color should not be treated. To quote Mr. Cooper,
four-letter word. Love.
Today, many people in the Deep South still oppose interracial marriage, and it is still a controversial issue. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans still oppose interracial marriage, showing that interracial couples still face some struggles. But it shouldn't matter.
20% they need to visit some friends and family who are interracial marriages, and they will understand how a good life can be if you compromise a little bit. In any marriages you need compromise. But
shouldn't view the color of that person's skin or what they look like, or handicaps, disabilities, a wide variety of things. It's who that person is.
It's hard to judge a book by its cover.
Yeah.
That'll be a good outcome, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Until you get to know us, please don't judge us, that'll be the main thing that I'll let them know.
Yep.
After all, there are also people, and we should remember Martin Luther King when he says that we should judge people on their character and not on the color of their skin. Let's treat everyone equally so that we can move to a more egalitarian society and have everyone prosper together.